You know, that feeling when you're standing in a store holding an item?
Oh, yeah, like constantly.
Right. Maybe it's I don't know, a cheap fast fashion t-shirt or just a simple candy bar. And you look at the price tag and you just know deep down that the number on that little piece of cardboard is lying to you.
Yes, it's this gut feeling that something is off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because there's physically no way this item was grown, harvested, manufactured, shipped across an entire ocean, and placed on this shelf for like $3.50 without someone somewhere paying the hidden cost.
Right, the math just doesn't add up.
It doesn't. We all sense it, but we've never really had the language or the actual mathematics to prove it. Until today, maybe.
It's a profound intuition, honestly. We constantly sense that disconnect between the price we pay at the register and the actual human reality of how that product came to exist.
Yeah.
But historically, we've just, accepted that disconnect. We just shrug and say it's the cost of doing business in a global economy.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Monday, April 13th, 2026, and we are looking at a brand new, frankly, massive white paper from an organization called ENTIFY.
Massive is the right word for it, yeah.
It really is. It's version 5.1, published just this month, and it's titled The Universal Equity Engine. And the explicit mission of this document, and I love this phrasing, is nothing less than bringing about what they call the end of fake prices.
Which is an incredibly ambitious scope. I mean, what this white paper proposes is completely throwing out the traditional economic rulers we use to measure success.
Throwing them out entirely.
Completely. They argue that metrics like GDP or inflation indices, or even the basic concept of measuring value strictly in fiat currencies like dollars or euros, they argue those are fundamentally broken at a structural level.
Wow.
Yeah, and in their place, ENTIFY proposes an equity index. This is a mathematical framework anchored not to a fluctuating currency, but to objective human well-being and, of all things, the golden ratio.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand this massive proposed solution, we first need to understand why the white paper insists our current system of measuring value is so warped. And it really boils down to one core argument, right?
Right.
That our current economic metrics measure absolute quantity, but they are entirely, completely blind to quality.
Precisely. And the white paper gives some very stark, undeniable examples of this blind spot. So, take gross domestic product, or GDP.
The big one.
The biggest one. It is the ultimate scoreboard for national success. But GDP merely counts economic activity. It makes no moral or qualitative distinction about what that activity actually is.
Right, it's just raw numbers.
Exactly. So if a massive hurricane completely destroys a coastal city, leveling homes, uprooting lives, the destruction itself isn't measured as a loss to GDP.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is, because the subsequent billions of dollars spent on rebuilding, that counts as a massive boost. The metric literally registers a human tragedy as a positive increase in economic activity.
Which really exposes how disconnected the scoreboard is from the game being played, And the paper points out the exact same flaw in the stock market.
Oh, absolutely.
You can have a corporation with a market capitalization of $3 trillion. And the market looks at that and says, wow, this is a wildly successful, highly valuable entity.
Right, they pop the champagne.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the actual workers creating that value on the ground might be utilizing government food assistance because they literally can't afford basic housing in the cities where they work.
Right. The metric reflects investor sentiment and speculative trading. It does not reflect intrinsic human worth or societal contribution.
And I know people will say, well, we've tried to patch this, right? Like the corporate world introduced ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance metrics.
Yeah, but the paper calls those out as well because they function more like corporate greenwashing bingo.
Greenwashing bingo, I like that.
Well, it's true. They are largely self-reported by the companies themselves. They're completely unaudited, and the standards are wildly inconsistent across borders. It's a Band-Aid on a broken system.
Because at the end of the day, all of these traditional metrics share a deeper structural problem. They are absolute metrics denominated in fiat currencies, dollars, yen, euros. And those currencies are inherently unstable by design.
Yeah.
When I was reading this part of the white paper, it felt like trying to measure the exact square footage of a house using a ruler made of elastic that just keeps shrinking while you're holding it. You're measuring the ruler with the ruler.
That is a great way to put it, a closed loop of distortion. And this raises an important question. If a shrinking fiat-based ruler is useless for measuring actual human progress, what do we replace it with?
Right. What's the alternative?
The white paper's answer is that we need a metric that is dimensionless and relative. We need a way to compare the prosperity generated by a system against the friction within that system without ever relying on a local currency to act as the base unit.
We need a universal constant.
Exactly.
And because a fiat currency is just, a human invention that fluctuates based on politics and printing presses, ENTIFY went looking for a constant that actually exists in nature. They didn't look to gold or silver. They looked to geometry. They introduced the golden ratio.
Yes. The golden ratio, denoted by the Greek letter phi. It's approximately 1.618.
Now, you listening might be thinking, how does a spiral on a Nautilus shell or the proportions of the Mona Lisa become an economic formula? The audio math here can be tricky, so let's really visualize it.
Right, let's break it down. The core equation of the universal equity engine is this. Equity index equals prosperity, divided by the sum of prosperity plus friction over phi.
Okay, so think of it like a physical engine. Prosperity, the P in the equation, is the forward thrust, is the positive output.
Yeah.
And friction, the F, is the heat, the resistance, the drag on the gears. And phi acts as a sort of mathematical shock absorber or a discount rate for that friction.
Exactly. And this framework is rooted deeply in ancient Pythagorean metaphysics. The Pythagoreans viewed reality as the interplay of two fundamental forces.
These are forces, right?
Yeah. You have prosperity, which represents the spirit, unity, the number one. And then you have friction, which is the physical body, the material resistance, represented by phi.
But, and this is crucial, they didn't just pick the golden ratio because it has a nice philosophical backstory.
Oh, no, not at all.
The white paper details an incredibly rigorous empirical calibration. They didn't just assume this mathematical constant would magically apply to modern macroeconomics. They gathered massive amounts of data across 139 different countries to see if the real world actually behaves this way.
And what's fascinating here is the methodology behind that data collection. They looked at decades of verified metrics from institutions like the UN and the World Bank.
Real hard data?
Yes. Health-adjusted life expectancy, institutional trust, literacy rates, economic stability. They took all this data and essentially asked the math, what is the optimal discount factor for friction in a human system? What number best predicts actual human outcomes?
Wow.
They tested thousands of possible variables to see where the data would naturally settle.
And when they ran the numbers across those 139 countries, it wasn't a random scatter plot. The data consistently converged right around 0.618.
Which is exactly 1 divided by phi.
The hard, modern data literally proved the ancient philosophy.
It did. But to me, the most compelling piece of evidence in the entire white paper is what they call the 76-year proof. Because ENTIFY didn't just look at a snapshot of today's economy. They ran this formula backward through time.
Like a historical backtest.
Exactly. They created a temporal anchor called the Global Equity Index, or GEI, which is a population-weighted average of all those country scores.
And when you track that Global Equity Index from 1950 all the way to 2026, the stability is staggering. Over 76 years, this global index remained within a microscopic 0.081 point band.
Let's really put that in context. Think about what happened between 1950 and today. Global GDP shot up 500%. Major fiat currencies lost 85 to 95% of their purchasing power.
Insane.
We had the birth of digital assets like Bitcoin, which can, swing 20% in value on any given Tuesday just based on a social media post.
Not to mention the geopolitical chaos. We had the oil crises of the 1970s, the collapse of the Soviet Union, 9/11, the 2008 financial meltdown, and the massive global disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And yet, through all of those systemic shocks, the Global Equity Index absorbed it without moving more than 0.01 points in a single year.
That's wild.
It demonstrates that real foundational human progress is incredibly slow and stable. An index that tracks actual human experience, health, trust, and basic freedom is vastly more resilient than any currency based on market speculation.
Okay, I do have to push back on this a little because this specific part of the equation was like twisting my brain. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of the formula. The math dictates that when prosperity exactly equals friction, when the forward thrust perfectly matches the drag for, the resulting score isn't 0.
Right.
And it isn't a 50-50 wash either. The resulting score is 0.618. How does that make sense? How can a system where the friction and the prosperity are perfectly equal still result in a net positive human outcome? Is the math just artificially injecting optimism into the data?
It's a brilliant question, and honestly, it's the exact hurdle many economists will stumble over. But it's not optimism. It's an observation of structural reality.
Okay, explain that.
The math shows that the baseline of human capacity naturally exceeds the dead weight of systemic friction. Think about a community recovering from a natural disaster.
Like the hurricane example earlier.
Yeah. Exactly. The environmental friction is immense, often equaling or exceeding the immediate economic prosperity. Yet, human networks naturally organize toward survival, cooperation, and marginal improvement. Even when a system is struggling and the resistance equals the vitality, the human spirit's drive to connect and rebuild remains dominant.
So it's baked into our nature.
Yes, it's the mathematical structure that simply best predicts the reality of human resilience.
So the point 618 isn't a thumb on the scale. It's capturing the inherent buoyancy of human beings. That is fascinating. But to make this universally stable formula actually work, we need to know how to calculate prosperity and friction in the real world.
Right, the actual variables.
Because we can't just plug abstract concepts into an engine.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the architectural framework that ENTIFY uses to evaluate literally everything.
They call it the universal 4x4 basket architecture. For any entity, you measure 4 dimensions of prosperity, which they define as positive societal output, against 4 dimensions of friction, which is the external resistance or harm.
For prosperity, those 4 dimensions are happiness, wealth, health, and freedom. And for friction, the 4 dimensions are poverty, inflation, corruption, and inequality.
Exactly.
Within each of those baskets, the primary dimension carries exactly 61.8% of the mathematical weight. So happiness drives the prosperity score, and poverty drives the friction score. There's that golden ratio again, deeply embedded in the architecture.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, here is the radical unification of the entire system. These exact same 8 dimensions apply to a country, a corporation, and a single product.
A product.
Yes. The white paper defines a country simply as a macro company whose product is the quality of life of its citizens.
I was trying to wrap my head around this everything is a product concept, and I came up with a comparison to test it. So if I'm understanding this right, you evaluate the inherent societal value of a digital Bitcoin and a physical loaf of bread using the exact same 8 human dimensions.
Yes, you do.
But how does a loaf of bread have freedom or corruption? Or how does a piece of code have health?
Because every product is a micro-intervention into the human system. So yes, the loaf of bread and the Bitcoin are measured on the exact same axes.
Okay.
How does the bread impact health? You look at its nutritional durability versus the chemical preservatives used. How does it impact corruption? You look at the supply chain ethics. Was the wheat harvested using exploitative labor?
Oh, I see.
Conversely, how does Bitcoin impact freedom? Well, it provides censorship-resistant transaction capability, but how does it impact health or friction? You have to measure the massive environmental energy costs required to mine it.
Right, the energy grids.
Exactly. Direct harm, supply chain ethics, and user utility universally apply to everything we produce because all products either add to human prosperity or increase human friction.
It totally strips away the artificial boundaries we've put up between the economy and the people, which transitions perfectly into how this actually looks on a physical price tag. Because having established how to score a product's true value, ENTIFY gives us a new way to buy things using dual tokens.
This is where it gets very practical. Under this system, every product now has 3 distinct prices. First, you have the distorted market price.
The normal price.
Right. That's the dollar amount you see on the shelf right now, which is driven by speculation, brand markup, and local wage arbitrage. Second, you have the EQV, or the equity value token. This represents the fair market price, adjusted mathematically for the ethical score of the producer and the country of origin.
And third, you have the LHV, the life hour value token. This is what the white paper calls the world's first true stablecoin.
Yes.
And it's critical to understand why it's stable. It is not pegged to a fluctuating fiat dollar. It is not pegged to gold. It is pegged to exactly 1 hour of human life.
That is the anchor. The LHV is tied to the global median wage, which currently sits at 6.857 EQV per hour, and it is entirely independent of local wage arbitrage.
Meaning geographic borders don't matter.
Exactly. An hour of a garment worker's life in a developing nation counts exactly the same as an hour of a software engineer's life in Silicon Valley. Time is the one non-renewable resource we all share equally. The LHV measures the objective time and skill invested into making a thing.
The white paper gave 3 specific examples of how these 3 prices interact, and we really need to look at how they weave together to expose different types of market distortion.
Let's start with a standard chocolate bar. The current fiat market price might be, say, $3.50.
What?
But when you run the formula factoring in the supply chain, the labor, the societal friction, its fair EQV price, is only $2.41, and its true cost in human labor, 1.78 life hours.
So the market price is 45% higher than its actual equity value. That's a positive 45% distortion.
Right.
It's overpriced. But in the realm of agricultural goods, that mostly just reflects the candy company's profit margins and marketing overhead. But now, compare that agricultural supply chain to an industrial one. Look at a fast fashion t-shirt.
The market price for this t-shirt is incredibly cheap, just $9.99. Right. But the fair EQV price is calculated at $6.33. And here is the shocking number. The true cost to produce that shirt, from picking the cotton to weaving the fabric to the factory floor to the retail store, is 8 life hours.
8 hours. That is a plus 58% market distortion. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because then you look at the tech sector. The third example is a flagship smartphone.
Right.
Market price, $999. Fair EQV price, $834. True cost, 40 life hours. Let's really put those last two side by side. A $10 cotton t-shirt takes 8 entire hours of human life to make. But a $1,000 piece of highly advanced technology only takes 40 hours. What does that tell us about brand premiums versus actual physical exploitation?
It reveals the architecture of global inequality. The market distortion metric makes the invisible human costs suddenly visible. A high positive distortion on a cheap item like that t-shirt is a glaring signal of gross exploitation.
Because someone had to put in the time.
Exactly. You are looking at 8 hours of a human being's actual life. Packaged, shipped, and sold for less than $10 solely because the brand can take advantage of global wage disparities. The LHV strips away the illusion that a cheap price tag means the product was cheap to make. It just means the person who made it wasn't paid for their time.
It changes the entire psychology of shopping. And this isn't just a thought experiment for economists. ENTIFY has built a real-world application for consumers to use right now in 2026.
Yes, they've introduced what they call the Fair Price Oracle. It's an app with a barcode scanner. You literally just point your phone at any product on a shelf, and it queries the database to instantly reveal all 3 prices: the fiat market price, the fair EQV price, and the human cost in life hours.
And the governance behind this is fascinating. Remember how we said happiness for a product translates to its user benefit?
Right, the prosperity metric.
Yeah. That user benefit score isn't dictated by some central authority or a secret corporate algorithm. It is crowd-refined via democratic user voting. The people who actually use the product decide how much it genuinely benefits human life.
And it's crucial to understand why this system is suddenly viable now, in 2026. The white paper identifies a perfect convergence of historical forces. First, public trust in traditional institutions is at an all-time low. People know inflation metrics don't reflect their grocery bills, and they know corporate ESG reports are largely marketing.
Right. People are waking up.
Exactly.
Right.
Second, we finally have the massive machine-readable data sets required to calculate this at scale, compiled over decades by global NGOs.
Data transparency that literally didn't exist in a usable format 10 years ago.
Exactly. And third, mature blockchain technology provides the decentralized architecture required to manage these dual tokens, EQV and LHV, without relying on a central bank to print or control the supply.
But I have to ask the cynical question here. I can see why consumers would want this app. But the system ultimately relies on companies opening up their books and participating. If this transparency is going to expose massive markups and labor exploitation, why would a greedy, profit-driven corporation ever willingly participate in this ecosystem?
It's the most important question of the paper, and the answer lies in brilliant mechanism design. The system does not require altruism. It doesn't rely on corporations suddenly growing a conscience. Let me explain exactly how the tokenomics work.
These do.
Under the ENTIFY framework, a higher equity index score mathematically equals greater purchasing power. Here is how. The EQV tokens are minted and distributed based on the equity ratios of the participants. If company A pays living wages and sources ethically, their equity index goes up.
Okay.
Because their index is high, the products they sell command a stronger exchange rate within the EQV ecosystem. Their corporate treasury actually holds more global purchasing power. They can literally buy more raw materials or services because the network values their output higher.
Oh, I see. So if company B relies on sweatshops, their friction score goes through the roof, their equity index plummets, and the EQV value of their goods collapses. Their money becomes mathematically weaker in this ecosystem.
Exactly. Ethics become mathematically more profitable than exploitation. It is a direct financial arbitrage against unethical practices. By tying purchasing power to the objective reduction of human friction, they are forcing the market to race to the top, rather than racing to the bottom for the cheapest, most exploitative labor.
Man, we have covered so much ground today. We've gone from the fundamental broken nature of the GDP metric and shrinking fiat rulers, journeyed through ancient Pythagorean philosophy and the natural geometry of the golden ratio, verified it with 76 years of global macroeconomic data, and arrived all the way at a smartphone app that lets you scan a chocolate bar to see exactly how many hours of a human being's life it took to make it.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. So what does this all mean? It means that value is not a piece of paper printed by a government. Value is the quality of our lived experience. And for the first time, we have a mathematical framework that can hold the global economy accountable to that truth. Next time you're standing in the aisle of a store holding an item, you don't have to wonder if the price tag is lying to you.
And I would leave you with this final thought to carry with you. Next time you're standing in a store holding a cheaply priced item, imagine the price tag isn't printed in dollars, but in minutes of someone else's life. If you had to physically spend 8 hours of your own life working on a factory floor to afford a fast fashion t-shirt, would you still buy it? It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What is the actual currency we are spending when we consume?